Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the EduGrowth's Higher Ed EdTech Showcase on empowering learners and educators through active learning. I'm Sophia Hyland, the Marketing Coordinator at EduGrowth, and I'm delighted to be your host for today's program. If you're new to EduGrowth, we are Australia's education technology and innovation industry hub. Through connection and collaboration, we exhilarate Australia's EdTech ecosystem globally. Before we begin today's program, I would like us to pause to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognize their continuous and unbroken connection to the land, waters, and culture across the country. I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, and Bunwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the country I am currently on, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. This program is only possible through EduGrowth's partnership with ASCILITE. ASCILITE is a globally recognized and professionally connected community of professionals and academics working in fields associated with enhancing learning and teaching through the pedagogical use of technologies. ASCILITE seeks to shape the future of tertiary education in relation to technology-enhanced learning by enabling and sharing high-quality research, innovation, and evidence-based technology-enhanced practices. Thank you to the ASCILITE team for their support and their ongoing contributions to the Australian higher education ecosystem. Now, I would like to welcome Chris Campbell, who is the president of ASCILITE, to officially open today's showcase. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Sophia. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. ASCILITE is very happy to be joining with EduGrowth around this presentation. And ASCILITE is the Australasian Society for Computers in Learning in Tertiary Education. So in today's world where we have so much more online learning than what we did just a few years ago, ASCILITE's one of the leaders in this area. So I would like to thank everyone for joining today, and also I would like to thank EduGrowth for their continued collaboration in this space, and we really enjoyed working with EduGrowth last year around our various initiatives, as well as the EdTech Summit that was held or the Melbourne EdTech Summit. Thanks, and I hope everyone has a great session this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Chris. In 2022, EduGrowth changed the way we do showcases by introducing our case study model. In this model, companies and a user of their solution will detail how they partner to innovate their learner experience. This is an opportunity for educators to really hear how Australian EdTech companies are creating impact with learners. If attendees have any questions for our presenters throughout today's program, please feel free to write them in the chat box to the right of your screen. With that in mind, I'm delighted to welcome Orna Nee Crawley, the head of Learning Services at Open Learning, to tell us about the fantastic outcomes emerging from their High Resolve Soft Skills Educational Online Program. Welcome.
Hi, Sophia, and thank you. Thanks for the welcome and to EduGrowth for having us. I'm just going to share my screen, if that's okay, just to begin our presentation of our case study. I'm just checking. There we go. Thanks, Sophia. So first of all, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. My name's Orna. I'm the head of learning services at Open Learning, as Sophia mentioned, and we'll also be joined by Taz Fritzer from High Resolves and Veronica Wong from UTS. So they will give us some additional perspectives on this partnership. So the partnership in question today is the partnership between High Resolves and Open Learning. And UTS as well. We have a 3-year partnership that we'll discuss today as part of this case study. So we'll take a look at this partnership from the perspective of the scope, the challenge, the solution and implementation, and then the outcomes for UTS and for High Resolves. So first of all, I'd like to ask Taz from High Resolves to join us and just give us a little bit more context about High Resolves and about who High Resolves are.
Wonderful, thank you, Orna. My name's Taz Fitzer. I'm a program leader with High Resolves, and we've been around for about 17 years. We were founded in Sydney in 2005, and the main purpose of our organisation has always been to empower young people to develop the social justice and global citizenship skills to help them find their place in the world. And the primary way in which we've done this over the last 17 years or so has been the delivery of some really wonderful detailed workshops, which traditionally we'd always delivered face-to-face. These workshops really work around developing those skills, whether it's around their perceptions of identity or collective action, or developing the skills to work towards their better selves. These are the types of things we love to work with young people in both the high school and the tertiary education system to develop those passions and the skill sets and tools to work towards those goals. We've been partnering with Open Learning for a number of years, and obviously with the challenges that we've faced going remote in the last few years, that's been a fantastic partnership that will be talked about in a bit more detail later, but the partnership we've had with Open Learning has really allowed us to take what we have done so well for such a long time to the next level in a new world that's really called for that type of approach.
Great, thanks, Taz. Well, we might continue through and talk a little bit about some of the scope and challenges that High Resolves faced as they, as we, I suppose, went about setting up this partnership and the reason behind it. And in order to do this, I'd actually like to play a video from Mehrdad, the CEO of High Resolves, who couldn't be with us today as he was traveling, but this gives some really great context around this partnership, the challenges, and why we partnered together with High Resolves to deliver these programs.
What I wanted to do is maybe start by telling you why we picked Open Learning and what we've been pleased with. So first of all, we looked for a digital platform for about 10 years. And I have to say it was an exercise in frustration. And we were disappointed and unimpressed by every platform we looked at. And having done courses on platforms like Canvas, I find them completely unacceptable in terms of level of feature functionality. It's a horrible experience. And I can say that because I'm not Open Learn. And we just didn't think there would be a platform that would allow us to do the sorts of things we do. And what do I mean by that? We think, and we agree with Adam in his description of Open Learning that I've heard that I really liked, was that it's not about students interacting with content, it's about students interacting with students about the content. And for us, the work that we do in schools is highly energetic, highly interactive, participatory learning. It is not lecture plus quiz. So the idea of moving to digital platforms was never going to be about show a video and then ask a bunch of questions. It was going to be, how do you engage in the kind of conversation and let the students learn from each other? And so when I met Adam at the beginning of January last year, we had decided on January 16th that we needed to prep for COVID. Our view on January 16th was there was a very high risk that face-to-face delivery was going to be canceled for last year. And so we made a strategic partnership with Open Learning by February, and by May we had moved massive amounts of our content onto Open Learning. And as a result, we managed not to have to lay off a single person, and we managed to follow through on our deliveries. All that was incredibly positive and possible because of the way in which Adam and the team and Cherie worked with us and partnered with us. But the thing that I was not expecting, and our goal for our Open Learning work was to be able on all our targets, whether it's cognitive outcomes, behavioral intent, or net promoter score. My target was, if we can just hit 60% of what we hit on our face-to-face delivery, I would be happy. That would be a good enough target for digital. The interesting thing a year and a half into it is on virtually every single metric that we measure, we score higher on Open Learning than we do on our physical. And this is puzzling for us because we are a very well-awarded program. We've won like the Design Australia's award, Good Design Australia's award for best user experience. So it's not like our stuff isn't great. It is great. It's just that we've managed to move them to open learning in a way that works even better. And part of what's going on is that in face-to-face deliveries, you might have 60 kids that are going through our immersive learning, and it might be that 15 to 20 of them are flying under the radar. And what happens in open learning is that they can't fly under the radar. And so we're engaging some of the people who were not as active through the way our course design works. So that's my opening, is that we've been very excited about it. We have a lot of ideas about how this works.
Thanks for displaying that. Now I'd like to continue on and talk a little bit about the solution and implementation to the challenges. So as Mehrdad mentioned, some of the challenges were moving a very active and engaging face-to-face program into the online space, and doing that through online learning and retaining the, I suppose, essence of those high resolves program. And that's where the three-way partnership between the Open Learning team, High Resolves, and UTS came into play. So we partnered with all of those parties to pilot these programs. And I'm just going to toggle quickly into Open Learning to actually show you an example of that active learning design in play in the program. So just bear with me while I change tabs quickly. So this is Open Learning, and this page has been customized, or this course has been customized for High Resolves. So one key element of these courses is that they involved an element of synchronous and asynchronous learning. So learners can work through the online content at their own pace, but also supported by a really strong learning community. And then they also have some debrief sessions that are hosted on Zoom through the online courses as well. Learners can navigate through the various course sections here. And one example of an activity that comes in closer to the beginning of the course. So this activity is called Find Your People. Learners are introduced to the activity by watching this video. And then in the face-to-face version of the course, learners were given a persona at the beginning of the activity. This is a little bit harder to replicate in an online setting. So to get around this, we've used some of the open learning functionality. One thing that we've used is the random selector or the spinner. So the first part of this activity involves learners generating a persona for themselves by clicking on this random selector. And then that way they can proceed through the activity using that persona and taking on that persona as they do so. Next up, learners will interact with this part of the activity, and then they'll use Open Learning's sharing functionality. So they'll share based on their experience of completing that activity. And then one of the really powerful parts that allows for learner engagement and all learner voices to be heard, as Mehrdad mentioned there, is our course feed. So learners can view the comments that other learners have made, engage with them, reply to them, like them, etc. So that creates a really strong learning community. And one thing to highlight here is that High Resolves and UTS were really flexible and innovative in their approach as we co-designed these learning activities and this active learning experience online. So recognizing that we couldn't simply replicate exactly what we were doing in a face-to-face setting, but how we can come up with innovative solutions like this one to try that out in the online space. So thank you. I'm going to toggle back to our slideshow, and I'll ask Veronica from UTS to just give us a little bit of context outcomes that they have seen for this program.
Hi, thanks so much. So I manage a program at UTS called UTS Build. It's an extracurricular global leadership program preparing students to become global leaders and active global citizens. So we started working with High Resolves in the latter half of 2019, and I was really excited at what the future held. The content has always been engaging and a perfect fit for the objectives of our program. So in all our workshops and events, interactivity and engagement is really, really important to us. So at the onset of COVID, I wasn't sure if the online environment would continue to deliver high quality interactive experiences with High Resolves. But I'm happy to say that I've been really thrilled with the transition, and it's been working in a most amazing way. Through the Open Learning platform, High Resolves has been able to continue offering engaging and thought-provoking content that the students do find quite rewarding. They can, as is pointed out already from the presentation of this course just then, they can read each other's content, they can learn from each other in this learning community. And the inclusion of live facilitation by High Resolves in between the different course modules that the students have done adds further depth to the experience on the platform. So students can see what they've said online and then come back into the wider group and actually discuss further and share further what they have read from each other as well. For us as institutional administrators, the Open Learning platform has been pretty easy to navigate. We can see all the courses that we that have been offered through High Resolves to our students. We can view the profiles of the learners. We can review the course feed ourselves separately from each of the modules, and look at the reflections that each of the students have actually also learnt. We can track their learner progress as well, and we can message them through the system if there are any concerns that we have about how they're progressing through the content. So it's just been really quite a useful tool to have. You know, in the transition, both High Resolves and Open Learning were really open and accommodating to adjustments. I think we were possibly the guinea pigs in moving the content online, which worked for us fine. The process was streamlined as we found little bugs and issues, and everybody was really quite willing and accommodating to work them out so that everything is working as smoothly as it is today. I mean, we're really, really happy that students can continue using this at the moment. We are doing some online, so we are now starting a couple of face-to-face workshops, but we will definitely be continuing to have some of these online workshops in our program going forward as well. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Veronica. Just one last thing to highlight is, and Murda touched on this, just that the NPS scores for these programs have actually been significantly higher for the online version of the courses as well, which is a great measure of success for these courses, and just to show how, you know, that active learning experience has been really powerful. And some of the feedback from learners has been in relation to that, I suppose, engagement and learners feeling that every voice is being heard, and not just, you know, certain voices and those under the radar students that have been mentioned there in the comments. And Veronica touched on some of those open learning tools already, but we'd be happy to discuss them in more detail if we have time at the end during the questions. And the last thing I wanted to highlight in terms of outcomes, just that these programs are also award winning. So these programs were a gold winner at the LearnX Awards, and they were also finalists at the Learning Impact Awards. So I'd like to just thank all of you for listening. Feel free to reach out to myself or to Cherie if you have any additional questions, or I'm sure we might have a little bit of time for an additional question at the end. But I'll pass back to you, Sophia, as well, if you have anything else to add. Taz and Veronica, I do see a question here just around how the High Resolves team set UTS up for success. And I know, Veronica, you've touched on that a little bit, but are there any additional pieces that you want to add in terms of that question?
I guess in terms of the transition to the online space, they kept in conversation with us, I suppose. They didn't just say, we're doing something, you know, just take what you get kind of thing. We did work with them on some of the pilot, I guess, of the initial versions, and were able to partner, I guess, in designing it so that it was actually a useful tool for students, and it was meeting what we wanted the students to get out of it, but also obviously was delivering the content the way that the High Resolves team wanted it to do. So it was quite a process, I guess, done in collaboration with High Resolves. So I think that really made a big difference. And we've continued to tweak things. They were always open, even though it's their content, their curriculum as such, they were quite open to adapting little bits and pieces here and there to help support in what we wanted.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Veronica, Taz, and Orna. That was great. Really great to have a full case study about this incredible program.
Thank you.
So we will now turn to the In Conversation component of today's program on empowering learners and educators through active learning. In this conversation, we'll hear from Dr. Philip Ace, the Adjunct Associate Professor of Education at the University of Adelaide, and Dr. Lisa Jacka, the Senior Lecturer in the School of Education at the University of Southern Queensland. Today's session will be facilitated by Cherie Diaz, the Managing Director at Open Learning. Cherie joined the Open Learning team in 2018, where she thrives on the opportunity to leverage her experience as an educator and operational executive to partner with users of Open Learning. In 2020, she co-authored the Open Creds Microcredential Framework, Australia's first lifelong learning framework designed to meet the needs of learners, employers, and education providers. Prior to joining Open Learning, Cherie was the head of education delivery at the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Cherie, welcome to stage, and I'll hand over to you to introduce Philip and Lisa.
Great, thanks, Sophia. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's session. I'm joined, as Sophia already mentioned, by Dr. Philip Ace. In addition to his current role as Adjunct Associate Professor of Education, he has also had an established and long-standing career, which has built up his expertise in digital and remote learning in the tertiary and higher education sector. In addition to a previous role as Vice President of ASCILITE, he has also been a senior education delivery leader for more than 10 years, including leading whole of institution projects and working with government bodies as well. He holds a PhD in communication and education from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. Philip, thanks for joining us today.
Hi.
We're also joined by Dr. Lisa Jacka. So Lisa is a senior lecturer at the University of Southern Queensland in the School of Education. She has over 18 years of experience in higher education at institutions such as USQ, SCU, JCU, and UNE. She has been an innovator in online education for most of her career, with her focus on engaging learners through the integration of emerging technologies. Her PhD research investigated virtual worlds in teacher education to promote innovative pedagogy. Thank you both for joining. I've obviously done an introduction to yourselves, but it would be great to hear a little bit more from each of you about what you currently do in your day-to-day jobs before we actually jump into the conversation. Would you like to go first?
I can go first. My job consists of various jobs. I'm part-time with a company called Diaz, and we're looking at video virtualization. But most of my time I spend currently busy with two consultancies, one about EdTech in schools in Southeast Asia, and the other one about 6 Malaysian universities that I'm facilitating a benchmarking exercise around EdTech. But in between, there are all kinds of other interesting things that pop up as well.
Awesome. And I guess it would be great to be able to draw on all of those in the different roles and conversations you're having. So thank you. Lisa?
Hi. Well, I'm working in a school of education, so I'm working with teaching teachers. So I have very exciting opportunities to influence what they're going to go out and do with, early childhood through to secondary schools, which is really where I see that, it's really important that we're doing good things with them so that then they go and do great things with the, kids, and that is, the future of using, particularly around technology. And the real, I guess, my love, even though I'm an academic and I'm the current program director in IT, my love is really around learning design and finding interesting and different ways to do learning design. Hence me coming in through, also I'm a committee member with ASCILITE at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you. I loved when you were both talking just then, your faces lit up because you're passionate about what you do, which is good. It's good to have fun with what we do. Today's topic is empowering learners and educators through active learning. And I know at different points in the conversation, we'll talk about how does EdTech enable and all of that sort of thing. But I guess at the start of the conversation, it would be great to hear in your own words, what does active learning actually mean, and why is it important? Lisa, I might start with you this time.
Sure. I'm thinking we're going to get to just jump in. I guess for me, active learning is really about the students doing stuff. Like I'm always wanting to know what are the students doing. I'm always asking myself, well, I'm doing this, but what are the students doing? And so I've always been very focused on getting them to do things. And then from the doing of things, if I've designed it well, then they're learning the things that I'm thinking that, are important for them to learn. So that's really, for me, that is what it's all about.
Yeah. No, when you said, I'm doing things, but what are they doing? Reminds me when I started in New Zealand as senior lecturer in 1994, that I did a course on advanced course on learning and teaching. And that's the first time that I had to create a learning design for a course. And they had a column there on the right-hand side, and it said, what teacher does, or something like that. And all I could write, and another one is what are the learners doing, or the students doing? And all I could write there is listen, listen, listen. And I thought there's something very wrong here. And that really kicked it off for me, that understanding that what are the learners actually doing? And active learning for me is all about that. And it doesn't mean they have to physically do things, learning that's problem-based or practical. It doesn't have to. They can reflect. As long as they're reflecting, we can't see that activity, but we can support it with e-portfolios and journals and stuff like that. But I'm absolutely with Lisa. It's not what we do that's also important, but it's really what do they do.
Yeah, I love both elements of that conversation. And I think it comes back to when we're creating that learning experience, whether it's a once-off or it's part of a longer unit or a whole qualification, it's what are the learning outcomes and how are we going to, without talking about assessment, but how are we going to be able to demonstrate that we've enabled the learner to actually learn, apply, and demonstrate that they've actually understood and been able to adapt and adopt what they've learned in that process as well. So agreed. I guess then, are you able, Lisa, to talk through perhaps an example of how you're using active learning in your current delivery at the university?
Sure. I mean, I've come from a creative arts background. And so I think I've always brought this also, when I say about the students doing stuff, I kind of think, yeah, they need to be like making stuff, not just reading stuff, but like making stuff. And so I've always had a bit of a focus on that, which is where I was then using virtual worlds, which was a perfect space to get students to respond to what they were doing through building things and thinking about how they'd get their students to respond through building things. But most recently, I've actually started using VoiceThread, which has been really interesting for me. And what I'm finding is, because I've really been focusing on my students, because my students are all online, and the idea that asynchronously, that they have more opportunities in that asynchronous space, which is this time that works for them. And I'm like, so what are they missing? They're not coming to my synchronous sessions. How do I generate something that they still get that sense of interaction, being together, responding to the things that I've asked them to go and do and come back and show and talk about? And in the VoiceThread space, I've found it just took off. Like, my students just started talking to each other. And listening to the previous presentation, we were also talking about students feeling that they all had a voice. And I think that's probably something to do with the interface. That's also what I found. Like, the students are saying, we all get to be able to say something equally. Unlike if we were in a tutorial synchronously, you know, the ones who were most confident would have their say, and then others would, you know, you'd have to move on, or others would step back or whatever. So I've really got this sense of like a really active space has been happening through that particular piece of technology. And I'd be really keen if there are other people out there going, oh yeah, I use that. It's just become a bit of I've just found some really interesting things to do with it in the last 6 months since I've been at USQ.
Yeah, which is great. And I guess it leads to a question that I always have is, you know, how do you prioritize which EdTech tool, or what do you test and play with at any point in time?
Can I go there for a starter? I'm sure Lisa is ready for a few additional things there, but for me, it is about learning design. And I've done a lot of work in developing countries, working with folks, designing for online learning. And it is not, here is a tool, let's find out how we might be able to use that. Yes, that question must be asked at some point. But as part of a design of a course, what we need to start with, in my view, are the learning outcomes. And then we look at the assessment to ensure we meet the outcomes. Then we think about learning activities to do for the students to do to actually be successful in the assessment. And lastly, we think of content. And here students can be co-creators of that content as well. But the fact is, in that learning design process, where I say, I want people to reflect on this, that, or the next thing, that's where I ask the question, are there educational technologies that can help students reflect? And yes, there are. I can use an electronic portfolio. I can use an online journal. I can post things in an online forum, and so forth and so forth. But that question for me is all about pedagogy. It's all about the educational intent that I want to help the students achieve, and that helps me to take from the arsenal the correct educational technology.
Cherie, can I just jump in there too? Because I wrote something down from, again, listening to the session before, and there was a comment made about engaging thought-provoking content, which was, to me, again, it's that sense of we can set up the spaces, we can set up the technologies and make choices, but then unless we've got the pedagogy or the engaging thought-provoking content, you know, so whatever it is that the students are then going, oh, I want to have a conversation about that in this space with my peers, or, oh, I do want to go and do that particular activity because that's actually really interesting to me, not because the lecturer has said, go and do that and I'm going to grade you on it. So I thought it was really nice to hear that as a part of the success of that other program as well.
Definitely. And I often think back, you know, in a previous life, I did workplace training. So I worked within corporations that, you know, in the internal learning development team. And I often, it's a guesstimation, but, you know, you walk into a workshop in a face-to-face setting or a lecture or a tutorial, and you can preempt a fair proportion, whether it's 75 or 80% of the way the session's going to run and the types of questions you'll get and how an activity will play out. But I find quite often in an online learning environment, we feel the need to have planned out every engagement and to lock down the types of conversations that happen. So being able to free up some of the conversation or the touch points, but also giving the learners freedom to take off discussions on a slightly different tangent as well, as part of that co-construction of knowledge and collaboration that comes out of it, as well as the fact that as the educator, you don't have to drive all of the conversations or the activities itself.
No.
And I think, and this might also be a question to everybody here, is, you know, that I wonder if that then comes back to the confidence of the, you know, the lecturer, for want of a better word, in that online space. So, because my experience has been, that I feel confident in the space, and so I also feel comfortable kind of letting that go and having it, you know, weave in different directions. But when I talk to some of my colleagues, it's this real fear of what happens. What if there's some blank? If there's no sound? What if they're not talking? Whereas if they were in a room with those group of people, they'd be quite happy for there to be some blank time, or, you know, some whatever that is. And so I wonder if it's something to do with that. And then I wonder how our COVID experience has changed that for everybody.
Definitely. And if I talk about one experience, you know, when you were referring to the high resolves example that was shown earlier, working with a different partner at the start of COVID, they weren't using open learning before COVID hit. There was that concern in moving from a face-to-face environment to purely online, and it wasn't their default, you know, operating model of, but we'll miss students. And it was amazing working with them through that process to see that shift as they did a couple of iterations, that actually those students that were more reluctant to speak up and were more introverted and that sort of stuff, they were actually more proactive. And the feedback level and the engagement level increased because they didn't feel they needed to be on the spot, and that they didn't necessarily have to speak up in front of the whole cohort as well. So it does provide a different playing field for some students than what a face-to-face environment does as well. Sorry, go on, Phil.
No, I just agree with you there, Cherie, that in the online, especially asynchronous environment, students who would feel put on the spot if a question is asked and there's, you know, 60 others or 120 others in a lecture theatre, you know, they're not going to put up their hand. But in an asynchronous environment where they have opportunity to think and reflect, they can come back with a great response. So I think it's, for me, it's really not about, is face-to-face better than online? It's, for me, it is all about blended learning, and it's about blending the best of face-to-face with the best of online. And that blend can be 90% online in some cases and 10% face-to-face, or vice versa. It's not one is better than the other. And I think that's to do with the way students like to learn as well. And we know there are differences, not necessarily learning styles that's fixed, but there are differences in how people want to learn. And I think EdTech provides that. You know, you can have a synchronous event like what we're doing right now, or you can have an asynchronous online forum or portfolio or whatever, and other people respond better in those situations.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's that difference of separation out from what we needed to do to survive, you know, the COVID world versus what are the opportunities in that next iteration or in our day-to-day roles as well as part of it. And I think you also pick on an interesting piece, both from a technology perspective, but also a learning design element, which is taking the time to design or to use a piece of technology for learning's sake, rather than, you know, expecting a one-size-fits-all model, which is nice and ideal thinking about. It's easy and it's scalable, but actually, if you're not tailoring it to the different learning experience or target audience, it can have its pitfalls as well. Which leads me to a question of, what are those indicators when you're using different activities to engage learners in active learning, or EdTech to support that? How do you measure success and that it's working as intended?
It must have to do, well, no. It has to do with what the learner is experiencing. And we can measure that in a variety of ways. I mean, the most common way is formative and summative assessment, where we can see whether the people are actually meeting the learning outcomes and being successful in that. But the beauty with EdTech is that we have learning analytics at our disposal. And we can understand a huge amount more in an online world about the students learning than in a face-to-face world. We can see where they've been, we can see how long they've been there, we can see whether they are only posting responses in an online forum, or whether they are actually putting new ideas out there. So, and so forth and so forth. But there are lots of possibilities of understanding where students are struggling. And then there's ways to have people respond, throughout the course. We're not waiting till the end to find out that there was a problem. We can have regular, the buzzword a few years ago was continuous assessment, but that led to over-assessment in many cases. But analytics, can help us understand whether we are successful or the students are successful in the use of EdTechs.
Can I jump in as well? Because it's made me. I'm thinking about because my first response was, it's when they send me these nice emails and go, that was fabulous.
It doesn't hurt when they do that, though.
And then I was thinking about, I thought, actually a lot of the assessment I then design is also them reflecting on their learning. And so aside from, I guess, the learning analytics we can get from sort of our learning management systems and a lot of the technologies we use, is actually seeing a level of synthesis and understanding of what they're doing, that then I guess the way I've designed my assessment is hopefully to show me that that's come from the whole experience that they're having actually in the space. And I just wanted to share, because I've just recently surveyed my cohort I had in semester 3 using the voice thread, because I was interested in what feedback they would give me through that. And something that I just noticed in looking at it in the last couple of days is I asked them about collaborative learning. Did they think they had opportunities to collaborate with their peers? And I had set no group work. I had set no collaboration. There was nothing in the course that said you have to work with somebody. And I had 20, so it was a fairly small cohort, but 21 of my 35 students responded, and almost all of them, like it was really high, it was like 19, all said yes. We strongly agreed that we had opportunities to collaborate. And I was like, hang on, I didn't actually ask you to collaborate. So they had this real sense that they'd been doing that asynchronously, because I didn't run any synchronous sessions. And so I went, kind of just made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So I think that to answer what you're asking, Cherie, that I guess we look as academics as well for different ways of gathering that feedback from them about what's working and what isn't.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a great response rate, but also I don't want to call it an unintended consequence, but it's a bonus as to
it feels like an unintended consequence. I'm like, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I wanted to call out, I saw earlier today that Solar has actually released, it's available to download, a handbook of learner analytics, which is quite substantive in terms of the research and chapters in there. So for anyone that is interested in looking at what's currently happening in the world of learner analytics, it's worth a look, I think.
That's good. I want to, Cherie, I'm picking up the responses to our initial question, what does active learning mean to you? One person said the students are doing more in the classroom than I am. Well, the classroom could be a virtual one, of course, but totally, I'm absolutely with that one. Next one, moving responsibility of the learning from the teacher back to the students. And people like to use the term student agency, giving the students agency, like co-creators of knowledge, etc., etc. The response here was about students want to go away and complete task homework to understand the concept taught in class, or the flipped classroom could be that they actually do it at home and come to class, whether it's virtual or a physical class, and where we can discuss and debate and do all such things. But the important thing for me in that comment is that because they want to do things so that they know they understand. And somebody said, unless you do something, you don't know if you really understand it. You know, you think you know, but until you actually have to do it, that gives you that confirmation and feedback to yourself that, yeah, I can do it. And that's great that, you know, active learning does give students that agency and opportunity to do things. And Lisa, I was in you talking about coming in from the other side, the creative world, and but we've had some workshops during my time at CSU as well, where we, you know, the not the Ludo, the building blocks that you Lego building blocks, and you had to build things, you know, to illustrate what you think, and it was great. It really helped you to nail it, you know. You can't build a whole room full of Lego. You build a little something to have a key point that you want to convey. And it just that doing, you know, students want to go away and make sure they understand something.
Yeah, and I think it also then is that reinforcement of the ability to do or to know or to apply. It means then that they're more likely, and ourselves, like in our own worlds and jobs, etc., increases the transference or the likely transference of that particular capability in the intended environment, and quite often in other environments as well. So, you know, just because I learned something for a work purpose doesn't mean I don't get to walk away and take that knowledge or skill into my own personal life as well, which was great. There's a question that has come through from one of the attendees, which is, are lectures and lecture theatres a thing of the past? If not, how do we meet needs of all learners?
I'm going to say that I'll start with what University of Tasmania and a specific university in Perth, I'm not sure which one, have formally decided that there will no longer be any lectures at those universities. That's quite a brave and a strong decision, of course, and that came after the COVID period where they had to teach online. And so some universities are taking that step. If one thinks from a blended learning perspective, though, it doesn't have to be a thing of the past. It can be an element in a blended learning design. But it takes a very, very talented person to run for 40 minutes with PowerPoint slides and keep people interested. There are not many people that do that, and yet that has become the default way of delivering content, was, you know, across the world. So I'm very happy about those two universities. I'm very happy that people are asking that question. Do we really still need lectures, and for what purpose? I mean, if it's a good presentation with live animation and music and whatever, you know, if it's really well designed, yes, it can work. But if it's the boring stuff that most people have to go through, you know, of somebody showing slide after slide after slide and go on for 40 minutes, you know, without any interaction or interactivity of opportunity to at least use polls in, you know, with Poll Daddy or whatever software they want to use, then, I mean, I once got to ask, if you look at the learning design, what learning activity, I mean, if lecture is a learning activity that the students are doing, what aspect of an assessment or learning outcome does it satisfy? So I'm quite in that part where I also ask that question. I don't think it has to disappear, but I think it's important that one asks the pedagogical question. What do we want to achieve with it? Where does it fit into the whole learning design?
Definitely. And Lisa, I'll come to you in a second because I really want to get your thoughts on this. But I think it also draws upon that question that many, or conversation that many organizations are having now that the offices are open. And what does the new work world look like? And people are like, well, if I'm going to leave my house and have that return to office, commute, etc., then what is it that I'm achieving at work that I can't achieve at home, and how do I make the use of that time, etc. So I think it's not just happening in the education space, but it's a genuine question to be asking. Lisa, you've already said that you don't have synchronous sessions. How long has that been in place, and how did you support that?
I secretly tried it in semester 3.
Yeah.
But I also, like, I've always loved the idea of no more lectures. And many years ago at the institution, the university I was at, then it was like no lectures in our School of Education. And so we'd all kind of did stop doing them. But what I think what I'd like to pick up on that is then also what are we talking about when we're saying a lecture? And I've seen some debate about this, in the last year or so when we have all been talking no lectures. And it's like, well, some people say, well, I do really interactive lectures, what's called a lecture in my workload where I'm up the front, but everybody's there. But I still talk to them. This isn't me. This is, I've heard people talking about it like this. It's like, well, my lectures are quite engaging and interactive. And I think in some ways, what the shift is, and I think that maybe from a university perspective, they're sort of saying, let's say no lectures, we can then get rid of the 80, let's say there's 80% of people who do really boring lectures. We can go, okay, well, that's easy. We've easily fixed that. And then the other people who are doing interesting ones will just, we'll work out a way that maybe we'll call them tutorials instead.
Yeah.
Or we'll get people to do snippets online, in that, so that it can be looked at asynchronously. And I think just one other thought I had around that too was this idea. I remember many years ago now at an ASCILITE conference, actually. So there was lots of us and we're in a room, I think we were at Sydney Uni or something like that. And it was when we kind of were all started to use Twitter. And this idea that actually there was somebody at the front giving their, lecture at a conference, but we were all able to interact with each other through our hashtag, through Twitter. And at the time, I remember thinking, this changes the fact that we can actually, I can talk to, say, if Philip's all the way over the other side of the room, but he's made had an interesting thought and a comment, and we can have this conversation. So for me, the technology has the potential, and it is being used, but not maybe as much as we could, to break open the idea that a lecture is just all about, it's all one way.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I throw something in there as well about EdTech being used incorrectly? We've seen that during the pandemic as well at some universities where people basically, lecturers, they kept on lecturing. They used Zoom and Teams and they just kept on lecturing. So, that those universities can say, we don't lecture, we now have Zoom, but the pedagogical practice hasn't changed a single bit. And at other universities that I know of, the pattern was to put up PDF files, gigabytes of reading for students to do, which is as bad as a boring lecture. And not the right way to do. So, we must be very, very careful about thinking that EdTech will naturally change practice. It doesn't have to. If the learning design and the pedagogical intent doesn't change, we can have the brightest technologies used in an old-fashioned way, and not have any change of practice. I'll share this short story that happened in the States at the point when they were bringing in when air travel just came in. And some or other, I saw a photo of it, some or other a railway company realized we now going to compete with airplanes. And so what they do, they actually mounted an airplane engine on the locomotive and thought they solving their problem here. So I guess that locomotive went pretty fast, but it didn't really change anything, the technology. They didn't understand that there's a different paradigm and things work differently in a different paradigm. And it's the same with people just lecturing using Zoom or Teams or whatever. They can just as well go back to a big lecture theatre and do the same there. There's no change.
Yeah. And I think a question that often comes up in these sorts of conversations, but also conversations I have as part of my role at Open Learning, is how do you support that change process so that it's, academics and teaching staff and even down to learning designers, if there's different technology or tools being used, feel comfortable to have that space to play and test and sometimes fail, because that in itself is the learning process. Do you have any tips for anyone that's on here about, what's worked for you in creating that safe environment, and even examples of what hasn't worked?
Well, doing a PhD was a good excuse to try something that seemed a bit nutty when I was doing virtual world. Like I found that under the guise of I'm doing my PhD, can I try something?
Yeah.
Other people in the university let me try things. And so I think finding ways to try things where it doesn't look like, where it looks maybe a bit more, I guess, less high stakes.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, it really has to come from a supportive environment within our universities, if that's where we're working, or our schools or whatever that is, that does allow that sense of that failure is okay. And there's a whole range of reasons why we as academics aren't able to feel that that's okay. But to me, that's the main thing. It's like, I talked about, like in semester 3, I said, okay, I'm not doing any synchronous stuff.
Yeah.
It was like, I felt a little bit uncomfortable about it because I wasn't sure if I'd get some backlash, mainly from the students. And so when I came through it and they went, yeah, we like that, I was like, oh, phew, okay. So I guess there is that sense of being, there needing to be people who are willing to take those risks, who can then hopefully have success that then can be followed through. Like I'm seeing now some follow through at USQ where I'm saying, oh, I did this and it worked. And actually our students liked it. Our students, I'm working with the same student, so that kind of sense of that. But it's a great question, and it's a tough one. It's one I think we ask ourselves a lot.
And I think it's not just the teachers who are the players in that transition. It's the students need to play ball as well.
Yeah.
And the thing that Lisa was saying, how will they react? Because I know at a situation at the university where I was at, some of the staff that were really experimenting with things and getting all excited, and then at the end of the session, the student feedback was terribly negative, because they wanted to be taught and things like that. And so it's not just an overnight thing. And then the other role players are the administrators and the governance. If the policies and the plans don't line up, you can have the champions and the enthusiasts really out there by themselves. They're prepared to take some risk, but if there's no support in terms of policy and practice and plans, then it's difficult to do that. I did some work in my PhD about and how do you implement e-learning in higher education. And I came up with you have to come up with a model of some sort or a framework or something. But I call it the LASSO model, the leadership, academic and student ownership model. And I emphasize that you've got to have the top-down in place. There must be policies and plans and procedures and vision and governance and all those things. You have to have proper support through educational designers, through professional development, and all those kind of things. And then you have to have good inside-out strategies that where you're looking at people and their readiness for change. And sometimes people are over changed, change fatigue, sorry, that's the word. And I've seen that, the universe, then this changed, then that changed, and they just, no, I can't take it anymore. So you've got to align your top-down, bottom-up, and your inside-out strategies. And I've seen that work only once in a university where it was like that. And it did bring change. But it gave confidence to the teachers that they can experiment.
Yeah. And I think that confidence is important. I think one of the elements in a previous role that I've held is having a program and that safe space, but also understanding that innovation doesn't have to be throw out everything you're already doing. It can be little pilots or different tools or techniques or shifting, and you may roll it out with one particular cohort or one faculty or one program, rather than it having to be across the entire institution. But then there's almost that need to have the scientific element to it as to what am I hoping this will achieve? What am I measuring? And then, I don't want to say remembering, but also having the time to go back and track. Because quite often we implement something and there's a comment that's come through, there can be the temptation to implement the next shiny thing. Actually, you spend a lot of time tweaking and implementing different techniques. Are you giving yourself that time to do the continuous improvement loop? And how is it working as intended? Or how do I continue to tweak it? And, the UTS and high resolves team spoke about that a little bit earlier as well, about that continuous feedback loop.
And I guess, Cherie, that is also then, we talk about like the administrative aspect of it, like actually being given the opportunity to go, well, it didn't work this time. Well, let's try it again. Let's try it with a different cohort. Let's try it with the same course, but let's actually give it an opportunity to run, working through whatever those problems may or may not be, which often, and I think maybe then also, we talk about the next shiny thing. I wonder if sometimes it becomes the next shiny thing because we don't also then give it an opportunity to grow into something else. Yeah. And I just somebody mentioned project-based learning. I saw a comment come up. And actually, I just want, because in the semester 3 course that I did with my students, they were kind of learning through doing about project-based learning for them to then do project-based learning with their students. And I had a real problem with me trying to find a way to get them to do project-based learning because of the restrictions I had around the way I had to design my course, which was curious to me. But I just wanted to just shout out to project-based learning.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I was just looking at that response as well. This is true about Confucius. I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. This is true. Should we be moving more towards project-based learning? For me, the answer is that project-based learning is one of the pedagogies I can use to achieve active learning. Right. So there is also, there's augmented learning, and the interactivity with the virtual world and things like that is another way to be active. Being active in an online forum where I respond to things, being active through an e-portfolio, being active through an online journal. All of these things are ways to be active. And project-based learning for me is just one of the pedagogies one can use to achieve active learning. I'm not sure, I'm not saying no, but I'm not sure that all kinds of learning is better if it was project-based. Not sure about that, but it's definitely one of the pedagogies we have at our disposal to help students do things.
Definitely. Well, interestingly enough, we've almost finished our time and I'm getting the wrap-up call. So I'm going to, unless there's any final questions that anyone wants to put in the chat, finish up with a question to both Lisa and Philip as to, do you have any one or two final tips for anyone that's on this session about, ways they can approach active learning in both a face-to-face and an online classroom?
Sorry, Lisa, you go.
I know we're both busting to just go, I'll tell you what I think. I guess my feeling, and I just pull on something you said before, Cherie, you talked about taking things from, I think, from what in our learning space, say, to our outside of our learning space. And I kind of also wondered about, like, we should be, I think, taking things from our, our everyday experiences and whatever, and bringing them into our learning spaces. Because often when we're designing our learning, there's interesting things we do and how we solve problems outside of being a teacher, let's say. And if we actually then apply some of them to how can we solve these problems, whatever that problem is in your course, whether it's, getting students more active, it's like, well, what would motivate a student outside? What sorts of things do they do? And how do we leverage that and bring that into the space?
Yeah.
So I spend a bit of time thinking about this in terms of, children, because that's what I'm trying to encourage my students to do. So I think of things about kids are on phones, they're doing games, there's stuff like this. Yeah. How can I bring some of that stuff into my space that then will show that that's what actually going to get students engaged in what they're doing? Yeah. So I think it's getting rid of any barrier between real life, unreal life, I don't know, face-to-face, non-face-to-face.
Yeah, definitely. Philip, last remarks, over to you.
I would say that folks need to look carefully at constructive alignment of Biggs, John Biggs. It's not new anymore, but it has stood the test of time, and it talks about making sure that we align the learning outcomes with the assessment, with the learning activity and the learning content. And that one should very carefully look at your learning outcomes and then your assessment, and then not be afraid in the learning activities that the students will be doing, that might be 90% of the course, and your own facilitation is maybe 10% of it. But if you can design it with a high degree of student activities, you will create active learning, and that will lead to student engagement, and we know that leads to student success.
Perfect. I think that's an ideal spot to finish up. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and contributions to today's discussion. It was great. I think we'll finish with one last comment that's been made, which is, when prototyping in novel approaches, it can be useful to share these ideas with your students. They can provide feedback on your designs, and seeking ongoing feedback can help you fine-tune it along the way. And I definitely agree that students like to be informed about why you're doing things certain ways, that them being able to provide that constructive feedback, many of them value that opportunity as well. So I wholeheartedly agree with that approach, and just wanted to say thank you. The last thing I'll say, there was a question about whether the Solar handbook would be shared. I'll send through a copy to the EduGrowth team after the call, so they can share the link with everyone as well. And thanks, Sophia. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Philip, Lisa, and Cherie, for lending your time and fantastic insights on how EdTech is enabling active learning. I would now like to welcome Mark Sampson, the CEO of Synodi Solutions, to share details on their recent Student Pulse program in partnership with CQ University. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for pronouncing my company name correctly, which is great. I wish I'd chosen a different company name, which people could say as beautifully as you do. Thank you very much.
I think there is a bit of a sound issue there, Mark.
Okay,
Can you try again?
What we'll do is, while we try and sort that out, I will introduce, if we could just share the screen briefly, please, David.
Sure thing.
So while I try and sort my sound out, if I can just introduce Sean Sinclair. Sean is Director of Academic Systems and Transformation at CQ University up in Queensland, or indeed all over Australia. It's a pleasure to welcome Sean and thank him for support today. We have been working with CQ University for a number of months now, and it's a pleasure to have Sean here to talk about how we have worked together on a system that focuses on our software. It's called Student Pulse. Sean, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I'll just check, Sophia, can you hear me okay?
I can indeed.
My audio is okay?
Everything's perfect.
Awesome, thank you. So as Mark said, I'm the Director of Academic Systems and Transformation Projects here at CQ University. I'm based in Rockhampton. My role at the moment is to look after mainly our course and unit management systems, and also to support digital transformation and change management more broadly across the university. I've got a background in IT project management. However, recently, and this is where some of the work with Mark and Snowdy's come from, I had the privilege to work in the Provost's office for 2 years alongside my colleagues in learning design and innovation. So I'll just give a little bit of background about CQ University, and it's relevant to our case study today. We are a very diverse and complex organisation. We're dual sector. We have multiple campus and other locations right across Australia, more than 20 locations. We have 30,000 students, 10,000 of those are VET students, and almost half of our students are studying via distance ed. So that means that our teams, our staff are spread across our campuses, and that means that hybrid and online work and collaboration were a way of life for us even before COVID. So as I said, the relevant point here is that we're a complex organisation, staff working across multiple campuses, which means that coordinating efforts across our departments has extra challenges. And the case study and the challenge that I would like to share with you today was around our efforts to engage with students around student recruitment and student retention. Not in terms of educational delivery and so on, but more focused on engaging with students to whom we'd made an offer and they had not accepted that offer, or those students who had not chosen to re-enroll yet. And so this is an important part of our effort to recruit students, to keep them and also to support them. So the case study we're sharing with you today is not focused yet on engagement with students while they're studying. However, I think that the approach and the digital solutions that we're using, it lends itself to multiple areas around student engagement in general, as I think you'll see. So in that space, the particular challenge for us was that engaging with students to encourage them to accept their offer to study with CQ University and or to re-enroll and continue their study was a time-intensive process. We had to extract reports from our student systems, identify students that we needed to reach out to, build lists of students to contact, track whether or not we're able to make contacts with the student. We're limited to phone and email contact. Timeliness of data was an issue. Often, by the time we contacted students that they'd already progressed to accept an offer or to re-enroll, and they were wondering why we were calling them about enrolling when they had enrolled yesterday. And simply due to the size of the task, we weren't getting to all of our students. So it's a fairly fundamental issue and challenge for most universities. And of course, with the recent challenges thrown at us with the COVID pandemic, every single enrolment, acceptance or re-enrolment counts for our university, but also for our communities and our students. So we were looking for a digital solution and a combined approach that would help us automate that process where possible. It would help our staff to personalise their engagements with students by arming staff with more information about the students they were contacting. that would take into account daily changes to student status to make sure we had the very latest and updated information about our students and where they are up to with their acceptance or enrolment journey. That would allow us to support some of our educators to participate in those engagements. For some schools, our professors and lecturers were keen to be part of the team, reaching out to students to encourage them to re-enroll. But and that's okay, doing the outbound calling and on contact to students. It's okay if you're a member of a contact centre and that's your day-to-day job. But to jump in and do that work on an occasional basis, you need systems and information to scaffold that job for people who are doing that occasionally and want to do a good job. And allowed us to expand and also a system that would allow us to expand our contact channels to more contemporary channels like SMS and social media and so on. And of course, we needed this solution to work across a workforce that was very busy and dispersed across multiple locations, working from home and also on campus. So we went to market and we selected Student Pulse and Sonoti Solutions to work with us. And we made that decision late October 2021, and we it was a very rapid go live. We went live in January, and we're already delivering benefits to the organisation as of mid-January. So that's the background and the challenge. And at this point, I might hand over to Mark to talk a little bit about the Student Pulse solution.
David, would you mind sharing if possible, please? Hopefully the sound quality is improved. This is a very simple schematic of what Student Pulse does in one particular use case at CQ Uni. We ingest data from student systems, or the data warehouse actually at CQ Uni. We do that every 24 hours. And when a student has an offer made, we then wait 24 hours and then send them an SMS nudge if they haven't accepted. And you can pick on different cohorts of students and the rules as to on which basis students are nudged, and the messaging and the style of messaging and the content. We wait for a further period and then build a list of students using a complex query engine to call those students who still not accepted. And again, those rules are defined and heavily configurable. So you can send different engagements to different types of students at different times, depending on how personalized and contextualized you want those to be. If the student still doesn't accept, then the student engagement team gives them a call, and I'll show you the call list.
Sorry about that, folks. The sound there was just a little bit scratchy, so we might bring in Sean to talk to the flowchart a bit, or a bit about the implementation process with this project.
Sure, no problem. So hopefully you caught most of what Mark was talking through there, but essentially I think what Mark was going to say next in summary was that the system automates that process on an overnight basis of selecting those students based on the criteria that the student engagement team sets up. So the other important thing here is that once this is set up, the IT folks don't need to be involved. This is fully under the control of those teams that are making the contacts through quite a straightforward to use query engine. So that means that these teams have access to that data about the students, and they can build those queries to automatically populate the lists for those students that need to be contacted for various reasons. And the other nice thing that it does is when you access the call list as a person making those outbound calls, it also provides you with a very user-friendly interface to provide information about that student, but also scaffold the call and give you some safety rails to make sure that that call progresses as successfully as it can and is as focused as it can be. So I'm assuming Mark can hear me. Mark, are you going to bring up the contact board? Yep, fantastic. So there are lots of cool things that we could show you in the Student Pulse interface, and this is just one of those end user facing interfaces. But essentially what the contact board does is provides a prioritized list of calls for you or for your team that are next in queue to be made to the student. But as you can also see, so I'll just jump open with that call. As you can see there at the top left-hand corner, what it does provide is provides some contextual information for you as a staff member so that you can contextualise the call. It also provides a little bit of history about the contacts that have already been made through to that student, so you can also contextualise the call based on previous discussions that have been had or contacts that have been made with that student, so that it doesn't feel like a cold call to the student. It helps the student feel that we know them as part of that contact. It's customizable as to what information we provide the staff member making the call. So you can see there the sort of information that we're providing at the moment, and we're always trying to balance privacy versus utility here as well. And we work through that on almost a monthly basis to review that. You can also see that there's some workflow there to help the staff with their workflow and their management of calls. It'll pop call cards into callback later if first attempts weren't successful, and you can configure all kinds of rules around how many callbacks are made and those sorts of things. You can see there marks showing some of the workflow tools and the personal reminders that the agent can set for themselves. Now, I won't go too much more into that, Mark. Is there anything else you wanted me to cover off in that interface?
No, that's good. Thanks, Sean. That's great.
Yep.
I think if we probably open up for questions now, that would be far better.
Perfect. So we'll just jump into a little bit of a Q&A. Sean, what are the business outcomes and tangible outcomes? What have they been?
Yep. So as you can probably appreciate, it is early days, but already, let me just bring up the list. I've had a fairly excited student engagement team leader send me through this information just a couple of days ago, because we've, as everyone probably knows, we've just hit census date. So it's the natural time where we review. So just a couple of things. Student data analysis that used to take weeks now happens overnight automatically. So our student engagement team leads have estimated that alone in the lead up to term one, they've personally saved 160 hours of administrative time. And that's time that they can put back into monitoring how the outbound calling is going, connecting with deans to provide them with more up-to-date information on how our conversion efforts are going. It means that they have more time to coach their teams on effective outbound calling. And also it means that they can react much more quickly if priorities around student conversion change on a daily basis, which they have been, and they've been able to respond within hours, whereas traditionally that would have taken weeks, which is kind of pointless when we're talking about student conversion. The other thing is that they calculate that with the supporting tools, our outbound calling agents have saved 2.5 minutes per call. And the agents have fed back so these are our student engagement team members, they've fed back that they're feeling much more confident about the calls that they're making to students, and they're feeling they're connecting much more effectively with students because they've got that information to personalise the call. So good. So that's just one example. I've got lots I can walk through as we go. Yeah,
That's incredible. And how useful was the information in enhancing existing operational patterns in your institution?
Absolutely, very useful. So now what happens is, there's so many things, as I said, Mark and I could show you about the system. What it does is it actually allows you to track how we're going with student engagement. Are our calls getting through? What was the result of that call? And that's a judgment based on how the calling agent feels about it. But it's very easy for the student engagement team member or the academic staff member making that call to quickly record how the call went. The other nice thing is it also allows us to record student sentiment. So that means that as we're speaking with the students on the phone, we can quickly, through a drop-down, an easy-to-use tick box drop-down type mechanism, we can quickly record some key elements around student sentiment. So we're getting really good day-to-day intel on why our students are feeling confident about accepting or not, and the reasons why not, or are feeling confident about continuing study or not. And so that not only helps us, I guess, continually improve our recruitment efforts, but probably more importantly, is going to help us improve our student support mechanisms. So we'll understand perhaps have a better understanding of what the challenges are for a student continuing study. And that's the really exciting part for us. We're starting to get through some data around that. The other thing to point out, Pulse is, it takes in data, but it also records and feeds back data about those interactions. So you start to build up a richer profile about that student and how they're going, depending on how you're interacting with them and what sort of questions you're asking them. So we're pretty excited about where this is going to go.
That's great. And I guess as a final question, what sort of engagement does Pulse lend itself to?
We are about to find that out. So we've at the moment the 2 use cases, because we gave the poor old team and Mark and his team just 2 months to go live, and that included Christmas. We've gone with conversion from offer to acceptance, enrolment, and re-enrolment. So 3 use cases, in fact. We're going to start exploring where Pulse might have a role to play in engaging with students where our learning analytics data shows that they might need some contact. Not sure where we'll go with that. At the moment, what we have is we've got a student analytics system that gives our educators an indication of how students are travelling, and then of course they contact the students through a variety of means. We think that Pulse might lend itself to supporting that and making it easy for those educators to make those contacts and those nudges, and also track how they're going, callbacks and all those sorts of things. That's one area we'll explore. The other area that we're going to explore is post-census date, is using Pulse as really an outbound research management system, so we can talk to some of those students who didn't feel they were ready to continue or didn't start studying with us. We can start to contact them and build up some data around and why. What are the blockers? What are the reasons why? So 2 quick scenarios there. We've got lots to explore. One is around student support. One is around market research.
Perfect. That was really comprehensive, and I feel like really covered the breadth and incredible work of this program.
And Sean, you probably can't hear me, but thank you for doing all of that, seeing as my sound's rubbish.
That was great. You did a great job, Sean.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you both into that insight about the Student Pulse program. It's great to hear about all these outcomes for learners. As today's program ends, I would like to again thank ASCILITE for their partnership in this program. I would like to thank all of today's presenters, as well as guest speakers, for lending their time and insights. If you're an EdTech entrepreneur with a great case study to share, please submit an EOI through the link in the chat. Thanks again, everyone who tuned in today. Have a great evening.